Welcome everyone to the Wednesday of Open Week. One more day and we get to watch some Open Championship golf at Royal Liverpool, also known as Hoylake. Today we have a special guest, Blyth Bell. He has been a member at Royal Liverpool for 35 years. He's a past club champion. He's a past club captain. It's a special one, so please enjoy Blyth Bell.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of the Travel Royally podcast. Today, we're very excited to have as our guest today, Blyth Bell. Blyth has been a member of Royal Liverpool for 35 years, and he's a past club champion as well as being a past captain of the club. And additionally, he served on the Heritage Committee of that venerable club with such a rich history. He co-authored a book called A Hoylake Celebration that truly celebrates Hoylake's 151st years as a club. He's also a member of the Atlanta Athletic Club. Blyth, welcome to the Travel Royally podcast.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we truly are delighted to have you, Blyth. It's we know we have a mutual friend in common, and I'm thrilled that he was able to connect the two of us. Now, originally, you're from Scotland. So how did you come to golf, and what took you to Northwest England?
Right. Well, it's a sort of long story, but I was brought up just north of Dundee, and I went to Aberdeen University where I studied medicine, and I was trained to be a family doctor, really. And at that time, in the late 80s, somewhat unbelievably, it was difficult to get jobs. There were too many family doctors. Now you can't get them for love nor money. But so there weren't a lot of jobs around, and I sort of looked around, and I needed to be near a half decent links course, and I got an interview in East Lothian, and I actually got an interview in Sandwich in Kent, but that really wasn't for me. And this one came up in Cheshire, and it was a good practice.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it's not that far from Hoylake. This might probably work. So that was 36 years ago, and I've been here ever since. So I've been retired for about 4 years now.
And how did you come to play golf? Was it through your family?
Yeah, it was my dad, really. My dad he came to golf quite late on in life. My father was a very good curler on the ice, which is a big game in the northeast of Scotland, and he took up golf very late on in life. But I took up golf as a boy, and the town where I grew up, everyone played golf. So I was brought up in a little place just north of Dundee called Forfar, and they had their 150th about 2 years ago. So they were 1871. And it's a Tom Morris course that was revised by Braid in the 20s. And it's really quite a nice little golf course, standard strat 69, par 69. So I spent my boyhood going around there 3 times a day when I could. And then I went to Aberdeen University, where they had a very strong golf team. And student golf was great. Regional golf was very strong in Angus, and that's really that's my golfing background. And that was it, really. So I played golf wherever I've been, and I played a lot of golf courses. Mainly links courses in the UK, but I've played a lot more, and I've played quite a bit in the US as well. So I'm a well-traveled golfer.
Yeah, I am as well. I prefer links golf to inland golf. So
yeah,
I can't wait to get back over every time, and I'll be over in a couple of weeks. As you know, we're going to be playing down in Cornwall, which we're looking forward to. But
yeah,
so you're fortunate to belong to Hoylake. It's a fabulous club with a rich history. Let's talk about how the course came to be and its ties to St. Andrews, if you would.
Okay. Well, there are a few ties to St. Andrews in some ways, and the club started in 1869, and in 1869 Liverpool was a boom town. It was the second port of the empire. It traded sugar, it traded cotton, it traded just about everything with the rest of the world. It's one of the main lines to the US, main shipping lines, passenger liners, and the population of Liverpool went up exponentially, and it attracted all sorts of people. And a lot of the men that came down to make their fortune through trading through the city of Liverpool were Scots, and they came down to see what they could do in Liverpool. And a lot of them, were businessmen and traders in Scotland, but there were opportunities opening up to trade with the US. And a lot of our early members were, they dealt in sugar. Sugar was a big thing, and cotton. And so a few of them got together and decided that the land at Hoylake was suitable for the game of golf. And it's quite a flat area, and must have been pretty wild in 1869. And they decided to have a golf course. And the first captain, a little red-haired guy with a beard called James Muir Dowie. He wasn't a great golfer, but he was from the east of Scotland originally, and he married Robert Chambers Senior's daughter from St Andrews, the famous Scottish writer, golfer.
Right.
And he married her daughter. So it was through those connections that they got Robert Chambers Jr., who was a very good player, and George Morris, who's the brother of old Tom. He came down and designed the course, the 9-hole course, with Robert Chambers Jr. And that's how it all started. Predominantly Scots were the first members, and the ambition, they were, by this time, a lot of them were very wealthy, and the ambition was to make Hoylake as good as St Andrews or Prestwick. And they were very, very ambitious, and they wouldn't be, they wouldn't be thwarted in their quest to do this. So within 2 years, the club became 18 holes, and they opened the holes up the other side of the beach to the other side of the road to West Kirby by the beach. And they managed to get one of the royals of the day, the Duke of Connaught, son of Queen Victoria, to be our first patron, and we became Royal Liverpool. Within 2 years of starting, we were a royal club, and we were 18 holes, and we were in the big time. So that was the beginning of all things, if you like.
Wasn't there a race course on the property initially as well?
Yeah, the Liverpool Hunt Club raced on the area as well. It was used for all sorts of things, and the race course, I think, was started in the 1840s, but we coexisted with racing until about 1876, and then the races went away. But some of the cops are they are remnants of the original paddock. Our what we called the field in the middle of the course was a paddock for the horses, and our last hole for the championship. No, sorry, I get confused here. So the second hole for the championship, which is our members' last hole, is still called Stand, and that is where the stand for the races was. When the course first started, there was a wooden stand there for the winning post of the races, and the first hole for us, and the third hole in the championship, dogleg round the corner about the bounds, is called the course hole. and it's not because it's a golf course, because it's a race course. So it's called the course hole, and so the problem was that you got shocking lies because of all the hoof prints and things like that, and
Yeah.
there were railings, and there's a famous old watercolor by Hopkins that shows I think it was Horace Hutchinson breaking his club when he took a backswing because he was under the railings, and he broke one of his hickories, and that was captured by Hopkins in watercolor. But by 1876 the racing was gone, and it was a golf course predominantly.
Well, my recollection is the first hole for members plays along the Cops, right? Isn't that out of bounds on the right?
Yeah. Scariest opening hole in golf, and one of the best 19th holes in golf.
Yes.
But it always gets your attention. Starting with a 5 is never bad.
Yeah.
And if you birdie it, it puts you completely off whack, and you usually don't score well because the shock is too much for your game. But
well, I'm going to have to disagree with you on the scariest first hole in golf. I think the first hole at Ballybunion along the graveyard is a little scarier, but
yeah,
probably for different reasons, right?
Perhaps, but you need to hit a really well shot at Ballybunion to go in the graveyard. You just need to lean a little one to the right at Hoylake to go in the field. So
yeah,
I think it's very good hole, because the further left you go, the longer your second shot is. The safer you are.
Yeah.
You sometimes you can't even reach the green. So that's the genius of it's so simple, and yet it's so effective.
Well, since it became an 18-hole layout and the racing was halted, how's the course changed in the last 150 years?
Gosh, it's changed by degrees. It's changed by events of the day. It's changed, by the needs of the modern golf, if you like. So it's changed significantly. I'm thinking it changed quite a bit in the 1890s, in the run up to our first Open Championship in 1897. But it was sort of by 1921. For the 1921 amateur, the course was in pretty poor condition, and something had to be done, really. And they engaged Harry Colt, the true genius of golf architecture. And Colt came in and he resited, I think it was about 4 or 5 greens, and moved them into the higher land in the dunes, especially in the second 9 holes. And his, like what Colt did all over the place, at Lytham and Muirfield, and it was transformational, really.
Right.
And that was a big change. And then more recently, in the 60s, Fred Hawtrey, Martin Hawtrey's father, came in, and we changed our third and fourth holes. The third used to be a straightaway par 5 with a short hole after it, and he turned that into a dog leg and made a great par 3, which is called the new hole, still to this day, although it's 65 years old, it's the new hole.
Yeah.
And it changed the angle of the 5th hole, the telegraph hole, and it changed the driving of that and changed that into more of a dog leg. So those changes were well received, certainly.
And I'm sorry, what year did that work take place?
I'm thinking maybe 64, 65. So before
the 67 Open.
Before the 67 Open Championship, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then more recently, certainly since 2000, we've had 3 new architects, we've got 6 new greens, and the routing's been changed in 2019 on the back nine, really to accommodate lengthening our two par fives on the back nine.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of change, certainly since 2000. And it is what it is. It's certainly a more difficult golf course than it was prior to that.
Yeah.
And we'll see how they get on. We'll see how they get on this year.
Well, I've played there twice and absolutely loved the entire experience. Not only the golf, but it's a beautiful piece of land for golf. But in addition to that, the clubhouse behind me is a wonderful spot. As you said, the 19th hole is fantastic. The members are friendly. It's just a very, and I think the other thing for people like me from the States, and particularly those of us from Atlanta, at least the last time I was there was a fair amount of Bobby Jones paraphernalia. Certainly recognition of his achievements there.
Yeah. Well, Bobby Jones is, to be lucky enough to be one of the host venues of Bobby Jones's Grand Slam year. We've been blessed with that, and all of our connections, all of our travels, all of our, it gave us a credibility that we were blessed, absolutely blessed, and so we've got lots of Jones stories. We have a great big, beautiful portrait of Bobby Jones on our stair.
Yeah.
We've got a Bobby Jones corner with a sort of collage I did for the story of the 1930 Open Championship and his original scorecards and everything. So, Bobby Jones was hugely important to us, and that particular Open Championship, probably the part of the greatest achievement in the world of sport, not just golf, really. And he was revered, and that's probably why I'm a member of Atlanta Athletic Club. We've been going back and forward there for 30 years now, and the great connections.
Well, he returned to Hero. He returned to a ticker tape parade down through New York. Yeah.
It was very interesting because he struggled a bit at St Andrews to win the amateur, and he had like 3 or 4 really close matches, and he had a belief that his name was on it. He thought he had a desperately tight match with Cyril Tolley. He played George Voigt, the American, in the semi-final. They had a desperately tight match that was, it could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And yet, he had the feeling that, this was his championship, and so he got the first leg, and then he came down to Hoylake, and he struggled in many ways through the championship. He didn't qualify particularly well. He started well in the championship, and he was under a little bit of pressure after the 3rd round, and Archie Compson went round 68, and that sort of took the lead from Jones. But he started well in the afternoon, and he was par going to our far hole, which is the members' 8th hole, par 5 towards the end, which is actually going to be a par 4 for the Open Championship this year. And he hit 2 great shots to the left edge of the green, which is there's a sort of runoff on the left and a raised green, and he sort of duffed his chip and hit his next one too hard, and then he 3-putted and made 7, and he was in a daze by his own admission after that, and he just sort of he just gutted it out, and he played a great sand shot at 16 till he birdied both par 5s on the second 9, although he dropped shots in both par 3s, and then he went into the clubhouse. He was one of the earlier starters, and and they gave him a large glass of whiskey, and he sort of nervously clutched that for an hour and a bit, waiting for everyone else to come in. But McDonald Smith came close, and Leo Deagle came close. They both were the ones that could have challenged him, and but they didn't do it. And Bernard Darwin scuttled across the course to a house on Stanley Road, just opposite the course, and that's where he gave his copy, his broadcast, and his copy for the Times. He couldn't say that Bobby Jones had won until Bobby Jones had won. So so he had a broadcast arranged from one of the houses at the time, and so Bobby Jones won the Open at Hoylake, which was fantastic. So,
well, I'm glad you brought up Bernard Darwin, because
Mhm.
he has a very strong affection to the club, obviously, and he called Royal Liverpool the breeder of mighty champions.
Yeah.
So for people who are less familiar with Hoylake, what do you think he meant by that?
Okay, well, some people think that's because a lot of our champions were great golfers and great players of their day, and that is one way to interpret it. But if you read quite a bit about Darwin, and he loved Hoylake, the quote is blown upon by mighty winds, breeder of mighty champions. And that was one of the chapters he did in one of his books. And I think he really means that, Hoylake was a venue that bred champions, in as much as John Ball, Harold Hilton, and Jack Graham, to a lesser extent, they were fantastic golfers, fantastic amateur golfers, and they were bred at Hoylake.
Right.
And I think that's what Darwin really meant with that phrase. They were homebred champions. They were great golfers. They were golfing travelers of the day. They won championships all over the place, and I think that is really what it means. And also, that was probably written, may have been between the wars. It may have been before World War One. And here, I don't think when he wrote that Bobby Jones had won the Open or Walter Hagen had won the Open at Hoylake. So that's how I interpret it.
That's funny that you say it, because that's how I interpret it as well. I thought that, the fact that Harold Hilton and John Ball were contemporaries, although from very different backgrounds.
They were, yes. What fortune to get two of the best amateur players in history to be around at the same time, winning championships from Hoylake. I have a theory that you need to have two or three things in place before you get good players coming through. And I think, they need to be brought up near the links. They need to be in an environment or a club that encourages everyone to play golf, young people, old people, whatever. And they need to be, there needs to be a supportive professional there, but they need to have peers, and they need to have a peer group that plays golf, and they grew up playing golf. And that was the atmosphere at Hoylake at that time. So it was once Ball came along, I think he was born in 1861, and then he started to start doing stuff. And then Hilton came along. He was born in 1869, the year the club started. And by that time, they had a lot of good young players, and the standard of golf at the club was very, very good, and the membership was going up exponentially, and it was getting noticed. And Ball was, he was a wonderful player. I think of all the players I would love to have seen, I think John Ball was the one. Darwin described him as having a beautiful golf swing, perhaps the most beautiful of all, and he was a tenant farmer. His father was the proprietor of the Royal Hotel across the way, with it the club used as a clubhouse until 1895. And so John Ball was a proper golfer, and
my understanding is he missed at least 2 Opens because he had to harvest.
Yeah, I think the real reason, yes, I think that's probably the case. But he first went up to Prestwick as a boy. He was 15 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he went up with the pro Jack Morris, who was Tom Morris's nephew, George Morris's son. And they went up to Prestwick when John Ball was about 15. And this was in the 1870s, I think maybe 1878. I'd need to look that up. But so they went up to Prestwick, and John Ball, as a boy, finished tied 4th in the Open. And this was, amazing. So, but he didn't really play much in the Open thereafter for quite a few years, and probably because he was working. Maybe he didn't have the wherewithal, but a lot of his best years were, he reckoned he was better at 18 or 19 than he ever was later on, and he had a huge long career. But he travelled up to Prestwick for the 1890 Open, and Prestwick had been extended about 8 years previously to 18 holes, and so they played it over 2 rounds of 18, and he was 41 for each 9, went round and won 6-4. It was a 36-hole championship, and he won the Open by 3 shots from Archie Simpson and Willie Fernie. So he became the first Englishman to win the to win the Open Championship, and he became the first amateur to win the Open Championship. Wow. Which was pretty cataclysmic. It had been the jurisdiction of the gnarled Scottish pros up until then,
right?
And so that was a huge thing. But
well, then Harold Hilton won as an amateur, and then Bobby Jones was the last to do so. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So Hilton won 2 Opens, and he won he was in his early 20s when he won the 1892 Open at Muirfield, the first Open that was held at Muirfield. Previously, the Honourable Company had held them at Musselburgh. So he won that championship with the great final round, and he then went on to win the 1897 inaugural Open Championship at Hoylake. So to have your local amateur win the Open Championship at your home club for the first time must have been something else. Many people over the years said, well, who was the best player between Ball and Hilton? And I think they were very different golfers, and the records were quite different. But I think Hilton's win in 1897 was probably the greatest achievement in many ways, because by that time the great triumvirate had come along, and once Barton, Braden, Taylor entered the fray, it was quite difficult to win Opens. And I think Hilton's win was probably the zenith of either of their achievements. But so that was a great fillip for the club.
Well, this is a great lead on talking about Hilton and Ball. Tell us about their impact on the club and on amateur golf in general, because it had to be substantial back then.
Yes, they were hugely influential. Ball, really, because of his, he was a very quiet man, an unassuming man. He sort of stayed away from the crowd. He stayed away from the dialogue. Just by his sort of ambassadorial solidness, I think he was a huge influence. But Hilton was a thinker, and Darwin said of Hilton, he said, there are few men that know their subject well, he said, but Harold Hilton knew golf, and he was a writer. He wrote a lot. He did an instruction book. He wrote another couple of books, and he was a great contributor to the correspondence of golf of the day. And I think they were, certainly once the 1900s came along, and they were very influential in many ways. Although, neither of them became captain at Royal Liverpool. The story goes that John Ball was asked to be captain, but that's pretty much shrouded in mystery. But he wouldn't have accepted anyway. And
he really shunned the spotlight altogether, right? I remember there was a report of him coming home from having won a tournament, and the club had arranged to meet him at the station, and he heard about it and got off at the earlier stage.
That's absolutely true. And it was one of the amateurs he won at St Andrews, I believe, but he was yes, he got prior notice that there was a bit of a celebration going on, and I think it was just before the Boer War, actually. And Ball went off to the Boer War and fought in the Boer War. He was a good shot because he was a tenant farmer, and he was a crack shot, and they clubbed together to buy him a pony, a black Basuto pony, to take to the Cape, and he was pretty fearless in the Boer War by all accounts, and his great arch rival, Freddie Tate from Scotland, who won an amateur championship at Hoylake, was one of our great champions. He was killed in the Boer War, and luckily for us, Ball came back and kept on winning amateur championships. And
he did get grazed by a bullet, though, right?
He did, yeah, he did. His horse was shot out from under him, and he was desperately, he was heartbroken about the death of his horse, but he was pretty fearless, I imagine.
Yeah.
But he came back, and Hilton, had a renaissance. They both had a renaissance towards the end of the good golfing days, and Hilton won the amateur at 1911 at Prestwick, and he very nearly won his third Open the same year at Royal St George's, and he had a couple of bad holes towards the end. Otherwise, he was right in there, and he went to America on the back of that and played in the U.S. Amateur at Appomattox in 1911 and won the U.S. Amateur. Led the qualifiers, won the U.S. Amateur. Yeah. He beat Fred Herreshoff at 37th in the final, and smoked 60 untipped cigarettes a day. Wore a tie throughout. He must have sweated to death almost every time he went out, and he won the U.S. Amateur Championship. So he became the first man to win the U.S. Amateur and the Amateur Championship in the same year, which has been repeated several times. But Bobby Jones did it, of course. But I think Lawson Little did it as well. But so yes, it was. And they lasted. They lasted. Hilton went down south and became a secretary of a golf club, and then Ball retired to North Wales, although he still came back for the major events, and he visited for the Open when it came to Hoylake and things like that. But neither of them died in Hoylake, and they just sort of went off to retire gracefully. But
you've studied a lot, obviously, about the history of Hoylake. Mm-hmm. And as you researched the book, did you uncover anything new that truly surprised you?
Well, there were a couple of things. You occasionally get something that you thought was a fact that wasn't a fact. So, the golf history is full of golfing myths, and if you read a golf book, it's a regurgitation of what someone said 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and it becomes fact, but it actually isn't true. And there were a couple of little things I picked up on, and one of them was about Tommy Armour. And Tommy Armour played in the match against the American team in 1921, and he played for the Great Britain team. And I researched Tommy Armour. Tommy Armour is a very interesting man in so many ways. And I researched him, and every reference, every textbook, they all said that he went to Fettes School in Edinburgh. He's a boarding school in Edinburgh. And I couldn't. And then one of my friends from Scotland said, but he didn't go to Fettes. And I said, really? He said, are you sure? And he said, yeah, well, I went to Fettes. And I said, I know for sure that Tommy Armour didn't go there, or I would have heard of it. And so I went trawling through all the newspapers of the day, and he didn't go to Fettes. He went to Daniel Stewart's College. So all the hundreds of writers over the years that have done biographies on Tommy Armour, they were all wrong, because he didn't go to Fettes School. And the other one I came across was Alan Graham, one of the Graham family. They were all very good golfers, and he got to the final of the 1921 Amateur Championship at Hoylake, and he was absolutely hammered in the final by Willie Hunter, who was from Kent, son of a pro from Kent. He eventually went to America and played professional golf in America. And it always said that Jack Graham Sr., who was a past captain of our club and the father of Alan Graham, died on the eve of the final. And that's why he lost 9 and 8 or something like that. And because his mind was on other things. His father had died on the night before. And so I sort of looked at the dates and family trees. These days you can find out just about everything.
Right.
And I was looking at the dates of the family tree, and I thought that's in the timeline of the championship and things. And I looked at it, and in actual fact, Jack Graham died about 4 or 5 weeks after the final of that amateur championship. So everyone that's written about it since 1921 has been wrong. He didn't die on the eve of the final. He waited another 3 or 4 weeks. He was terminally ill at the time. And so those were a couple of golfing myths that I busted. And there were a couple of other things that came up that some people have suggested that weren't in fact true. So
yeah,
it's like all history. It's
right.
It's what someone says at the time, and you really need to get into the nitty-gritty to find out if it's true or not.
Well, you brought up that competition in 1921, and it was the first international competition between the U.S., Great Britain, and Ireland, or just Great Britain, not Ireland.
Yeah.
And it was what was to become, or what did become, the Walker Cup. But the teams that were assembled were absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Okay. Well, it's quite an interesting time of history, because I have a theory that the Great War, the First World War, did so much damage to our society and our country in many ways. It took us many, many years to recover from that financially, and it killed a lot of our young men, and it put golf back in the UK. I don't know, it sort of stopped it in its tracks, really. Whereas in the US, golf continued and everything went, was going pretty much as normal apart from a year or two. So it was Bill Phones from Oakmont who wanted to take a US team over, ostensibly to play in the amateur championship at Hoylake and the Open Championship at St Andrews in 1921. And the powers that be at St Andrews somewhat reluctantly agreed to host them as a team, and they played at Hoylake. But the team assembled by the Americans was absolutely fantastic. Jones, Ouimet, Guilford, Chick Evans, Woodplatt, Fred Wright, who was a good player. They had a chap called Hunter, who was a doctor from California. So they were just, by their achievements by then and the achievements thereafter, perhaps the most talented side to come out of America. And we had what we thought was a pretty good side. And
well, you had Cyril Tolley and
Tolley and
Roger Weathered and
yeah.
Tommy Armour.
Tommy Armour. Tommy Armour was quite young at the time. He was severely injured in the war. He lost an eye. He had a plate in his arm. He had a brain injury. He was basically left for dead. And part of his rehabilitation was getting back to golf in Edinburgh. And so it was a pretty good side we had. And some of the players that were pretty good before the war were a little bit older and not quite so good after the war. And we were absolutely battered by the American team. And the club historian, the Guy Farrer, who wrote the first history of the club in 1933, he was crestfallen that this was a very dark day, and Darwin was, he couldn't believe what was happening, and this was this was what was to come. And Jones was 19; he just turned 19 at that time, and he was just bouncing. You can see the smile on you could almost feel the energy coming from him from the pictures. Very, very different from the man that came over for the 1930 Open.
Yeah.
And so it then became the Walker Cup. Walker had originally intended to be an international golf event rather than for a match, but there was so little international golf played at that time, and it then was dubbed by the press as the Walker Cup, and they went over in 1922, and they played for the first Walker Cup, and I think it was at the National actually, and it was then played annually for about 4 years, and then it became a biannual event. And we've hosted it a couple of times at Hoylake, 1983, and we hosted in 2019, which was our 150th celebration year. And it's a great event to have in your 150th. You don't want an Open because that's just too disruptive. But get them all over for a week and have a bit of a party and weekend golf, and it's the perfect event to have for your 150th. So so the Walker Cup, we hosted the first amateur international between England and Scotland in 1902, which was another first for Hoylake, and at really the instigation of the club. And there's a famous picture by Michael Brown of that event in 1902. But, so we've hosted lots of great amateur events. We've hosted 18 amateur championships, which we started as well. And I'm not boasting about this. This is just stuff that happened, and it's really the early men were influential. They were ambitious. They weren't pushy, but they were they knew how to get things done really.
Well, you've not only hosted 18 amateur championships, you've hosted quite a few Open championships, and
Sure.
it seems that every year that the Open is held, the R&A wants to identify the very best golfer in the field, and Hoylake has done just that. I mean, when you look at the list of winners, I mean, going back to the very beginning, and I'm going to skip one of them, but you've got J.H. Taylor, Arno Massey, Walter Hagen, Peter Thompson, Tiger Woods, and I'm skipping a couple like Fred Daly, people here would know, Roy McIlroy.
Yeah.
And then you had two amateurs, right? You had Hilton and then Bobby Jones. What about Royal Liverpool brings out the best play from players?
I don't know. Maybe we're, I think we've been lucky. I think the luck plays a huge part in this, and I think you've got to be, you've just got to be sitting on the seat when the music stops, and you take your chances with your champion. But thinking about it a little bit more carefully, I think Hoylake's very honest. I think it's an honest links. You get what you deserve at Hoylake, which is not always the case at every Open venue. So I think it's honesty, and it's a ball striker's course. It's a driver's course. It's a proper golfer's golf course, and I think it's just that's probably what does it. I think, but by and large, it's luck, and I think this year, all we can hope for is good weather and a great champion, but that comes down to luck. There are two things that you can't control: the weather and who wins your championship. So,
well, I'll tell you.
Hopefully, our luck keeps going, and we get Scotty Scheffler or John Ram or someone at the peak of his powers to win at Hoylake this year. But
well, I'll tell you what, 2006 really put. Not that Hoylake needed to be put on the map anywhere but the U.S., but in the U.S., it really came to the forefront because it was such a wonderful championship. And it appeared as though, particularly in the third and fourth rounds, that it was a match play event between Chris DeMarco and Tiger Woods. And both of them had recently lost parents, and the storylines were amazing. And I think Tiger got to 18 under to win. And how did the members feel about the play that week? And were they surprised that anyone got to 18 under?
Not really. Yeah. I think we were quite relieved it didn't go lower than that. The scoring was good, but the score of 270 really isn't. These days for an Open Championship, it's not that low. So there have been many lower totals in the Open subsequently. We also played at par 72. This year it's going to be par 71. So that'll take 4 shots off it. And I don't think par really matters. I couldn't care less. They've had 62s at Birkdale. They've had 63s at Troon. They haven't had very many low rounds at Hoylake. There may be some this year, but I think the most important thing is that you have a championship that people remember and that you get a really good champion. And I think the score is neither here nor there. You can't compare scores between venues, I don't think. But you just have to set it up fairly. You need to set it up tough but fair, and you roll the dice and you take your chance.
Well, there was an absence of the Open at Hoylake for nearly 40 years. Is there?
Yeah.
What was behind that?
Right. Okay. Well,
I don't want to be controversial. I'm just curious.
No. It's a sort of combination of things, and I would say that the Opens in the late 60s, with the probable exception of 1969, when Jacqueline won at Lytham, the Opens in the late 60s were pretty small Opens, and the Open wasn't a huge deal in the 60s. Golf wasn't a big deal in the 60s, and I think it was only, Nicklaus's win in 70 at St Andrews was quite a big Open. Then Trevino's Open at Birkdale 71 and Muirfield 72. The Open was starting to get big, and the crowds increased hugely. The tented village got an awful lot bigger. The infrastructure that you needed to host a championship increased significantly, and I think the Open became big in the 70s. Right. And the Palmer was still playing, Nicklaus was still winning Open. It was big stuff, and it really outgrew our capacity at that time to host the championship. And there was a sort of resignation within the club to some extent that, Hoylake was no longer, it was no longer big enough to host the Open, and we'd be quite happy hosting the Odd Amateur Championship. And we were sort of resigned to that in some ways, and it was only, it was only in the 80s and 90s that we really started to up the game again, and the course improved an awful lot in condition, and we had two very good amateur championships in the 90s, and we bought some land right next to the club, and that helped a lot. So we then had the sort of footprint that could manage an Open Championship. So we were thrilled when it came back. Certainly, I think Hoylake deserves to be an Open venue, and we're fortunate to continue to do that. But I think it also mirrored the 70s in the UK weren't great. Certainly the end of the 70s, and money was tight, and heavy industry declined, and there was an awful lot of relative poverty. And Liverpool is one of those cities that, when times are bad, times in Liverpool are worse. And there wasn't a lot of money in the city, and it was just a sort of not a great time for the area, really. And I think it wasn't a great time for our club, for not hosting the Open, and contributed to that. But everything goes up and down, and things are on a much better trajectory now. But and it wasn't really anybody's fault. I think I can't really say it was lack of ambition. It was probably lack of money, and I think it was just a casualty of the cycle of what was happening at the time, really.
Well, you've been a member now for 35 plus years. You've seen a lot of change.
Yeah.
You know all about the history, not just the history of the club, but the history of amateur play there and the great champions that have come from there. What about Hoylake are you most proud of?
Right. Okay. The thing I'm most proud of, it's a golf club. It's a golfers club. It's not for anything else. It's we have a lovely clubhouse, and that's fantastic. But you don't go there to sit in the clubhouse. You go there to play golf, and it's a golfers club, and it has golf going through it. That I like that. I love its heritage. It has heritage. Probably, the only place it would be would surpass us is St Andrews and the R&A at St Andrews. Beyond that, I think our heritage is, it's right up there. It's world class.
Yeah.
We've got great stories, great history, great heritage. The other thing, it's a very friendly club. It's a very inclusive club. It's a nice place to be a member. There are lots of really nice people there, and it doesn't have a lot of airs or graces.
Yeah.
And it's just an easy place to be a member, and I'm proud to be a member.
Well, what can visitors expect when we send people there? What can they expect when they visit Royal Liverpool?
Okay, they can expect a warm welcome. Our welcome is second to none. And they can expect people to be nice to them, and people will be interested in their play, and people will be interested in where they come from, and how they enjoyed themselves, and they'll be looked after. They'll be treated. We don't have a visitors' locker room at Hoylake. Everyone changes in the same place, and they're members for the day, and they're treated as such. And that's a big part of our brand, really. I think that's very important, and it's something we're. I don't know. It's something that we're conscious of, and I think that's very important. We've all got stories of places where you didn't feel welcome, and
right,
you don't go back usually. But,
right.
So what can they expect? They can expect a breezy day. It's a very exposed links. The greens will be good. The fairways will be good. And you'll have a good day. That's what you should expect. But yes, I think that sort of sums us up, really.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some people might have different things to look for. But,
No, I agree with everything you said. It's a wonderful golf course. You do get a wonderful welcome. The service that you receive there is excellent. It's a wonderful experience. So we're thrilled when we can get people to go there. Now I got
good.
one last question for you.
Yeah.
Most of the people that we send over are coming over for the first time.
Okay.
So for someone visiting England to play golf for the first time, they're going to play links golf. What advice do you have for them?
Okay. Well, I've hosted many Americans who subsequently become my friends for the first time on playing the links, and I think the best advice is be prepared. Bring some good quality rain gear with you. The cheap stuff won't cut it, really.
Yeah.
Bring a woolly hat. It sometimes gets a bit chilly. And be prepared for anything, really. The best advice most of the people I played with over the years, Americans, and the best advice is, look at your ball flight before you come over, and you need to be able to vary that ball flight accordingly. And the American, when he first comes over and steps on the first tee, and he said, how far is it? And I said, well, you want to hit it about 190 or something. And I said, but the wind's coming in off the left, and it's cool, and you probably need more club. And he says, well, what sort of shot is that? He says, is that a 205 shot? And I said, well, a 205 shot doesn't mean very much in a wind. It's it's the flight that you want to think about. And if you hit the ball, if you get the right flight on it, you can then think about how far you're hitting it, because if you play an American high spinning, high flying shot, you'll you'll lose a lot of balls on the way around. So I think that would be the things I would think about your ball flight before you come over, because you're going to need to vary that, and be prepared to run the ball onto the green when you can. And a shot landing by the flag on a links course is often not what you really want.
Right.
So it's a different game. It's a strategic game. It's a feel game. It's a two-dimensional game. It's different. But I love playing golf in America. But links golf's my passion, really.
Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. Well, that's wonderful advice. And that's, before I come over every year, I spend a couple of weeks at the range working on a low ball flight and how to hit a low boring shot.
Yeah.
And
I've
got very fond memories of having played Hoylake, and I can't wait to get back. But Blythe, this has been a great pleasure. We're thrilled that you could join us. You're a wonderful ambassador for the club and for golf historians. It's been fascinating to hear your perspectives, I should say. And thank you so much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jeff. And I will certainly look you up the next time I'm over in Atlanta.
Absolutely. We'll get around together, I promise. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Guys, again, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please share. If you know somebody who's watching the Open this week, please shoot them the video. I'm sure they would love to hear from a past club champion, past captain, member at Hoylake. So thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.